Hi, everyone. Welcome to Ed Talk, our monthly webinar about teaching, learning, and schooling. I'm Tim Dorr, Director of the Teacher Leadership Program at Northwestern University, and I'll be your host tonight. Today, we'll be using the webinar function of Zoom. You can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window to pose questions to us. You can also provide feedback or ask for help with the chat function. So you may want to have both of those open. They're located at the bottom of your screen. A recording of this Ed Talk will be posted on the Northwestern Teacher Leadership YouTube channel in a few days. Could be certainly by tomorrow. We will end the webinar at 6 p.m. And just want to do a brief shout out for our next Ed Talk webinar. We will focus on self-care for educators. Our guest will be Dr. Tom Gobieski, a Northwestern University adjunct instructor and licensed clinical social worker with over 40 years of experience in schools. Tom and I will be in conversation about stress, anxiety, and trauma, and how teachers can use some simple but powerful strategies to maintain balance in their professional and personal lives. It'll be a great follow-up to Dr. Allen's talk tonight. That will be on Thursday, January 13th, 2022 in the new year at 5 p.m. That's the second Thursday of the month in January. Look for information on our teacher leadership website and our usual social media channels by searching for Northwestern Teacher Leadership. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest for today's talk. Dr. Michael Allen has been the recipient of the National Association of University Women's Educator of the Year Award in 2014, the prestigious Jefferson Award for Public Service in 2017, Valparaiso University's Outstanding Young Alumni Award in 2019, and most recently, he was named the 2020 Elementary Principal of the Year. He spent 4 years as an assistant principal in East Chicago, Indiana, and Waukegan, Illinois. In addition, he has 10 years of experience serving as a principal at various schools in Chicago, Harvey, Country Club Hills, and Evanston, Illinois. Over the course of his career, he's emerged as one of the most respected school leaders in the Chicagoland area. He's taught over 250 practicing school district leaders how to effectively implement comprehensive mindfulness practices in their schools to strengthen their student-centered learning environments. In addition, he's served as a mentor, coach, and skilled researcher to various leaders and organizations specializing in emotional intelligence, equity, human resources, school improvement, and climate and culture, all topics I love. Dr. Allen recognized the huge need for reading materials that depict young Black boys in a manner that's authentic and relatable, as well as life-affirming. To that end, he and his brother co-authored the best-selling children's book, Brotherly Love. Michael tirelessly advocates to end policies that hold students of color down, so it was not surprising that he was the only school leader that contributed to the Inclusive Education Act that Governor Pritzker signed into law, mandating the teaching of pre-enslavement Black history to all students in Illinois. He's been an instrumental leader in various think tanks associated with Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management, the Chicago Urban League's Impact Leadership Development Program, through the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago, as well as Harvard University's National Institute of Urban School Leaders. He currently serves as an executive leadership coach, and we are so thrilled to have him with us here tonight at Northwestern. Welcome to the program, Dr. Allen.
Thanks, Tim. I'm sorry about that. I shared my screen too early.
No worry.
It's a tremendous pleasure to be with you. I really admire the work that you all are doing at Northwestern, particularly in your education department. So I'm really honored to be able to share some of my insights and perspectives and research from over the years. So am I good to go ahead and get started?
Let's go for it. I'll be here if anybody needs me.
All right. So today, what I really want to do is spend some time talking through what it looks like to put humanity back in education. So before I jump in, I know many of you are educators of some kind or have children who are in school. So I am going to kind of just give us a quick little, some house rules and then some logistics and then jump right in. So everyone's microphone is already off from what I understand. But if at any point you have questions, you are able to dump them in the chat. Tim will continue to check them periodically, but they will, for the most part, unless they directly contribute to where we are in the presentation, we'll go ahead and take those in the Q&A session. The other thing to sort of keep in mind is to sort of organize our time for this evening is we'll go through several different portions of the presentation, but they'll be highlighted by, number one, a land acknowledgement. I'll make a case for the fact that our country and the globe is going through a mental health crisis right now, in addition to a pandemic. I'll also talk about what humanity looks like and define in the other areas that are connected to it, what emotional wellness is in action. And then we'll have an opportunity to kind of engage in mindfulness together, and we'll transition finally into the Q&A session. Before I proceed, can everyone hear me? I just want to make sure that volume is good. Looks like we are good. Yes, okay. So what I always like doing, and I sort of picked this up in Evanston, so I'm always giving kudos to my family in Evanston. I like to start off with a land acknowledgement. Oftentimes it's important for us to be really center ourselves and recognize that people before us have made sacrifices for us to be where we are today. So I want to acknowledge I'm in Chicago, but in the Chicagoland area is pretty central to the same land for indigenous people who occupied this country that we now call America before we were here. The traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ottawa, the Ojobi, the Potawatomi nations, and many other tribes like Miami, Ho-Chunk, Sac, and the Fox all call this their home. I just want to make sure we hold space for the people who were here before us and who made sacrifices for us to be able to have the opportunities that we have today. So next, what I want to do, screen jump. If you could, this is on purpose, Tim, so it may flood you for a minute. If you could, I'm particularly interested in if you could fix one area in the education system today, what would it be? You can go ahead and dump that in the chat, take your time, do it at your leisure. Again, if you could fix one area in the educational system today, what would it be? I'll repeat one more time before I go on. Again, feel free to do it at your leisure. I'm not going to hold you accountable in this moment. If you could fix one area in the education system today, what would it be? So I'm going to kind of give you all a heads up, really centering today's learning because of the limited time. Generally, the concept or the topic that we're talking about needs at least a half day to really jump into and really take information that you can kind of operationalize into your practices. But Tim has given me a tremendous task of being able to do it in about a third of the time, which I'm excited to do. But what I want to kind of give you a context for is, I think many people have some sort of debate about what's going on in society and how it's impacting schools. So I really want to organize a good chunk of time making the case for the fact that we're actually functioning through two pandemics. I think for educators, for me, having served as a teacher and as a principal for virtually all of my adult life, I recognize that when we go into schools, we have the responsibility to deliver student outcomes. And as a result, so much of our efforts fall in the technical capacity, and we don't really have a lot of time or experience with understanding how to deal with the other pieces that influence learning. So as a result, I want to spend most of our time today talking through and making a strong case for the fact that we're living through two pandemics, and the one that I would like to spend a good chunk of time talking about is the mental health crisis. So I want to start out with something I would call low-hanging fruit, because many adults won't disagree with me about what's going on in the world, particularly in schools. Transition sort of happened at the end of last year, and then we saw some spikes in the summer, and it's been full go this entire school year with how many youth are dealing with mental health crisis and struggling with their ability to regulate their emotions. And as a result, it's showing up in school violence in various forms in our classrooms, as small as preschool all the way through 12th grade. So I want to take some time just to show you a recent piece. I believe it was on CBSN about 3 days ago. So if you could indulge me for a second, we'll follow this for about 2 to 3 minutes. Just want to make a case for what's going on with youth, not just actually in the Chicagoland area, but all throughout the country.
The U.S. Surgeon General is sounding the alarm about a worsening mental health crisis among young people. An advisory published Tuesday noted the number of youth experiencing depressive and anxiety symptoms doubled during the pandemic to 25% and 20% respectively. In early 2021, emergency room visits for suicide attempts in the U.S. were 51% higher for adolescent girls and 4% higher for adolescent boys compared to the same period in 2019. The Surgeon General says while the issue of mental health in children and teens is not new, it has been amplified during the coronavirus pandemic. For more, I want to bring in Dr. Jessie Gold. She is a psychiatrist and assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Washington University in St. Louis. Dr. Gold, thanks for being here. So tell us why the pandemic has worsened mental health issues specifically for young people.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think about all of your friends and family, it's worsened mental health, but in the particular population, the youth, they've had really bad mental health before the pandemic. And then in the pandemic, we took away a lot of their coping skills, their social supports, the way they go to school, the way that they, communicate with their friends, and they had to learn different ways to do that. I think that's been really hard. And a lot of people talk about being lonely. There's a role of social media in there that has been growing over time, but has some positives and some negatives, but hard to know how that's been affected by the pandemic. And then of course things like gun violence, racism, all the rest of the things going on in the world that contribute to the way that all of us are feeling. But I often feel that young people feel things and feel things strongly, and it really affects them in ways that we probably don't even understand.
Yeah, it's important to acknowledge that it is something that is widespread, but there are particular groups that are being really hard hit. And according to the Surgeon General's report, minority LGBTQ youth, they are both at higher risk for facing mental health challenges, particularly during this pandemic. How much worse is the situation for these young people?
It's significantly worse. I think if you look at just even suicide rates over the pandemic, we were thinking what's going to happen, and the only changes have been in African Americans. So I think there's a big difference when we look at the rates of how it's been affecting Black communities versus LGBTQ communities versus white communities. And I think, again, it has a lot to do with these additional stressors that they face that maybe the rest of us don't face or talk about out loud. And then on top of that, there's a stigma to getting mental health treatment in certain communities that had existed for a long time, long before COVID. And I think it just gets amplified when you don't talk about it or you don't know how to talk about it, and then you feel worse, and so you can't talk about it.
Dr. Gold, I really appreciate you talking about how we need to say these things out loud. I'm hoping that you can also empower us with other steps that young people and their families can do to help improve and protect mental health and well-being.
I think that's a good pausing point. What I want to do is go a bit further. So it seems that people don't have to take my word for the fact that there's a mental health crisis going on all throughout the country in various cities. That was made not just from a local perspective, but also from the U.S. Surgeon General, who's able to give us the context of data all throughout the country that mirrors the data throughout many other countries, particularly in the Western world. But I do want to draw your attention to three particular areas that sort of jumped out to me as a researcher as I was looking at preparing for this type of presentation. Number one, looking at gunfires, the increase in gunfires in schools over the last year, particularly I would say the last 14 to 16 months, but it's up by 150% since the start of the pandemic. I think just to give you sort of an idea, gun violence in schools or people bringing guns into schools and actually shooting them is actually rare. So a typical year, we may have this type of incident happen. I think 2019's data was about 30 incidents happened nationwide. The current year's data, so 2020 to 2021 has 70. So it's almost 2.5 times the number in the current year compared to the previous trend, which is around 25 to 30. In addition, fights are on the rise in schools. I don't have to say that to educators, you all know that. Particularly in middle school and high school, fighting that's uncontrollable. So this extreme aggressive behavior is not just on the rise in the Chicagoland area, be it north suburbs or south suburbs, but all throughout the country. And then the final piece that I sort of want to talk through as an indication that we're in an actual mental health crisis is when you think about the major cities' murder records are being set. So the cities that are listed here, they're not just having increases in their murder rates in their cities, they're breaking records. So cities like Portland, Tucson, Toledo, St. Paul, Austin, Albuquerque, Indianapolis have not just seen major increases in the number of murders in each cities, respectively, they're seeing record numbers with respect to murders in their cities today. And so, of course, I made a case for youth. I think some of us are skeptical because as adults, we don't necessarily have the language to recognize when we're in crisis. I could tell you a story that I had about 6 weeks ago, where since I've been removed from public education and off doing other things, every single week I make time to go to a masseuse. And around the second week that I went to her, she started to commend me in a really jovial way about what was going on with my body. Essentially, she was saying that my stress level probably reduced by 200% is what she said. She didn't actually recognize me at all because the stress that I was carrying had radically reduced because of my lifestyle choice. The point is, I believe the stress level that I carried prior to that type of exchange was something that I wasn't aware of. I didn't have the language to be able to measure it. And because I didn't know what I didn't know, I was operating from a certain paradigm with respect to stress in a way that impeded my life. The point here is that I'm not the only one who has struggled with this over the course of my life and my career. People all throughout the country, and all of the data points and news headlines that I'm going to highlight are all within the last 2 to 3 months. So they're not just 2019, they're all 2021, all the way through today. Some of them are as recent as last week. So just want to, again, make a case for the fact that it's not just youth that are going through a mental health crisis. Adults are not okay as well. So news headlines that I think are important to note would be teachers are not okay, even though we need them to be. And principals need social emotional support too. This is from Education Week. Both articles were printed within 2 days of each other in the September edition of Education Week. In addition, I would say from Edutopia, the news headline was, "This is not what we signed up for." This is actually principals and educators collectively making a point about how the job has shifted or the role has shifted in schools. And that's in November. That was about a week and a half ago. And then the final one here is, "School cannot go on this way. Educational leaders need to step up." Again, this is from Edutopia, and this was in November as well. The point here is, lost my screen. The point here is to make a case for the fact that we're going through a mental health crisis. It's affecting everyone, and we need to be very clear about the impact that it's having on each of us together. So I think that's the piece that most of us don't necessarily know what to do about, but I want to go a bit further. If I can share my screen again, let's see if it's back. There we go. So similarly, in Ed Week research, they had a study that took place this past summer. They said 62% of teachers say they experience job-related stress either frequently or always. In addition, they pointed out that in that same study, 41% of teachers said they feel like when they're stressed out, they feel like their jobs are less effective. What I found particularly important about this is that the stress that teachers are feeling at school doesn't just have a direct connection to how they feel about instruction. It also trickles over into their home life. So teachers also feel like the stress affects their ability to be able to show up with their partners, with their children, and other members of their family at home. And the final case that I want to make here is from the Yale Center of Emotional Intelligence. They conducted a study of principals. And this was in New York City public schools during the pandemic. This was actually, I believe, at the beginning of 2021. What they found out is that among the emotions that school leaders said they were experiencing at unsustainable levels. So leaders, when asked questions, they were able to identify that they were borderline at crisis because of what they were feeling. The 3 emotions that came up the most was anxiety, stress, and frustration. Again, I think it's important to soak that in because we're talking about the school leaders who are feeling this, and there's implications that it has on the teachers who they're charged to lead, and then the students who teachers are leading. the point in saying all of that is, it seems like there's no debate at this point that we have a mental health crisis that's affecting our youth and our young people, but also the adults. What I really want to spend the bulk of our time as we transition through is sort of talking through much of my research over the course of my career, but more importantly, in the present time with centering humanity in school. So when I use the term humanity itself, I'm talking about the ability to connect with all forms of human life. So what I like to do is sort of make this clear to folks so we're on the same page. In order to have humanity real, if you will, we have to sort of identify it in three particular ways. I like thinking of it as, if you think about the body, you got to hit the mind, the body, and the spirit or the soul. So the ways that you operationalize humanity, be it in the school, district, or classroom, it'd be number one, making sure that the decision or the action is pure. That's from the clearest, healthy mental space. The second piece is proximate or close to, from the seat of the person on the other end of the decision or the family. Again, I like saying this is the body, if you will. So your body's physically going into the seat of the other person, metaphorically. And the final piece is humane, the feeling of the warmest connection to that process. This is what activates the heart and allows one to connect to that particular decision or experience. So one of the things that I think is important to note at this particular space of the presentation is this idea that all of us as educators have been inundated with information for quite some time by people like Simon Sinek, and they've had powerful data that I think is completely appropriate, but we've centered so much of learning over the last, not just in education, but even in the business sector, over the last 5 to 7 years around starting with why. Everything should be about why. If we define why we're doing what we're doing, then that'll sort of help us be able to inform practices in an effective way. And that should help teachers. And then that should have a domino effect down to students. And of course, the outcomes with students will be our measure of success. I would probably submit to say, I think now has come to start to focus on two other areas in addition to why. We need to start talking about what and how. And by what, I'm thinking about the explicit thoughts related to empowering people in a healthy and holistic way. From a practical perspective, think, for example, like an agenda for a staff meeting or some type of professional development opportunity. That's the what that you're going to engage in for that particular experience. And then the how would be the day-to-day specific steps and actions to implement the process or system. Again, that would be the action steps after the actual meeting and the agenda. What's happening to actually carry out the vision for what was going on with respect to the agenda. So what I like focusing on to sort of give us at least my mind's picture about this. In education, we often think a lot, and I think teachers and principals are inundated with this idea of how can we get kids to make up the slide that they had from the pandemic? How can we make up that learning loss that we know that students didn't experience while they spent most of their time in remote learning over the last 14 to 16 months prior to in-person this fall. My suspicion is that I think we need to probably shift, and we should have, some districts in the country did this from day one this year, but if we haven't yet, I think it's a good time to shift when we think about coming back from winter break into ensuring that we actually have a way to measure for availability for learning. So we need to think about if a kid's in crisis and if they're not necessarily showing us physiological symptoms, how can we gauge that? So that's the context of this. The way I like centering this learning is through one of my favorite singers, Lauryn Hill. So she says, and it's stuck with me for decades at this point, how are you going to win when you ain't right within? Or how are you going to actually help someone else when you're not good yourself? More importantly, what I really want us to focus on is what does it look like for one to be fully available mentally and emotionally for teaching and learning? I'm not just talking about students. Oftentimes, I think we spend a disproportionate focus on students. In school systems, what I found is that the students will go as far as the adults will take them, not necessarily just teachers, but all of the adults that they come in contact with over the course of the day. So usually when students are struggling, adults are struggling. So it's really, really important to ensure that adults are getting what they need so that they can also provide what students need. The two questions that I think are important to kind of think about in this space is, at schools and districts and classrooms, how can we measure and engage mental and social emotional attendance? That means if I need to be here mentally, emotionally, and physically each day. Obviously, if I'm there, you can see that I'm physically there, but how do you know where my mind is and where my emotions are in that day? What types of information can you actually provide for me as a learner or as another colleague in the school to be able to gauge where I am in that space? And finally, how do we know that staff and students are fully available for learning? Again, the point is, number one, what's the tool or mechanism we can use to actually measure it? And then once we have the information, what's the baseline of what we know will be necessary to ensure that people are ready to do the tasks that they're expected to, be it the learner from a student perspective or the teacher as an educator. So the second piece is sort of thinking about the concept of emotional safety. So one of my favorite writers, James Baldwin, talks about in his book, The Fire Next Time, for all of the horrors of the American Negro's experiences, there is almost no language. The point of talking about emotional safety is an attempt to give language to all forms of human emotions. Oftentimes, people of color are expected to be able to function like machines. And so therefore, we learn coping mechanisms that don't allow us to share our emotions in workspaces because they may show up and make us feel like our colleagues will see us as unprofessional. But as a result of making that choice and negotiating the emotions we express, we're actually not giving language to our experience. Emotional safety would actually contradict that action, if you will. It's an attempt to give language to all forms of human emotions. It's achieved in relationships where individuals are open and vulnerable. The idea is to say, I'll give you an example because I don't want people to think that I'm encouraging you to just go to work tomorrow and cry or to express extreme emotions. I'm saying, if you find out that your colleague lost their parent or had a traumatic incident in their life and they talk to you about it, and you're around other colleagues or you may be around your students and you have an emotional response to where you cry, that's actually human, it's okay. I don't think that it's unprofessional to be able to express humane emotions towards experiences. If you find out about something similar to yourself, that's all human. I don't think that we're compelled to, as professionals, to suppress emotions that are natural for us, because when we do, and if we do, it has an effect on us that doesn't allow us to be able to show up as our most authentic self. And I think that it impacts our authenticity and creativity in the workplace. So one of my one of the articles that I have chose to center some of our time today is from the Harvard Business Review. It's actually not just targeting school leaders, but targets leaders all throughout various sectors. I think they interviewed over 5,000 leaders and sort of found out some basic information around leadership itself. The biggest thing that I think I wanted to highlight is that when we start thinking about, be it principals, superintendents, teachers, what leadership needs to look like, and I consider teachers leaders for the record, it's important to note that in this particular crisis, really two of them we have right now, but let's focus on the mental health piece. The most effective form of leadership is measured by two particular variables: wisdom and compassion. Leaders that have one of the two variables are typically identified and seen as favorable. Leaders that have both wisdom and compassion are seen as the most effective leaders in their respective workplaces. That's not just limited to education, it's also in the business sector and not-for-profit as well. The other pieces that they sort of highlight is just the idea of the golden rule, doing unto others as you'd have one do unto you, the idea of listening intently. So when there are conversations, making sure that we're fully present and preparing for them in a meaningful way, and sort of operationalizing compassion. And the final piece is as leaders. So this is anyone in the schoolhouse understanding the value of stretching people to see their potential. So being able to hold folks accountable for where they are, even if they're highly effective, and thinking about what the next level will look like for them in a delicate but accountable sense. So I think we're good on time. What I would like to do, because I'm going to make a case for this next, is have us engage in what we call a mindful moment. So if you could, wherever you are, if you could just sit up straight in your chair, make sure your hands are dangling right by your side or in your lap. I'm going to play one of my closest mentors and friends, Mr. Ambrose Brown, who is a relaxation expert, and he'll kind of give us about 3 to 4 minutes of information around mindfulness itself and lead us through a short breathing exercise.
Nelson Mandela is known for many things, but one of those things is his time. 27 years spent in prison. And during that time, he was known to have picked up meditation practice. And what he told us is that just 15 minutes a day of meditating can do a lot for us to become aware of our own minds. What happens when we become aware of what's happening on the inside is that we're better able to deal with life and things that are happening outside of ourselves. So, as Mandela said, 15 minutes a day practicing meditation can bring lots of fruit to your life. So, what happens when we spend time with our thoughts? We're able to process our negative emotions and thoughts and feelings that might arise so that when we're ready to, we can deal better with those things and other people in dialogue and conversation. So let's begin by sitting up straight in your chairs. Most important thing is to be comfortable. You can relax the body. No special hand postures or cross legs needed. Just sitting comfortably is most important. You could begin by either closing or lowering your eyes. And once you're comfortable, the eyes close, you begin to bring all of your attention to what's already happening around you. Any smells or sounds. There's nothing special you have to do right now. Just become aware of what's already happening. Now, begin to put your attention on your breath. Again, nothing special you have to do. The breath happens all on its own. Just notice the rising sensation as you breathe in, the falling sensation as you breathe out, or even your belly getting big as you breathe in and small as you breathe out. Or you can notice your breath on the tip of your lip or your nose as you breathe in and you breathe out. Now drop all the focus from the noises and the smell and your breath, sitting quietly for a few moments. Now starting at the top of your head, put all your focus there. We're going to scan down through the body for a quick check-in. Starting at our head, scanning down, past the forehead, into the cheeks, to the shoulders and the chest. Just noticing how the body feels, not trying to change anything. Past the belly, to the legs, finishing at the floor. Eyes still closed. Noticing how we feel right now. As we take a deep breath in, breathe out, and slowly and easily, in your own time, begin to open your eyes. Well, great. We just completed our meditation. Let's go over a few pointers about when and how to do this on your own. Remember, you don't have to do it for 15 minutes or even 10 minutes. Five is great. Also, another good thing to know is that doing it in the morning, during the middle of the day, during lunch or a break, or even before bed are great times to do a meditation. Don't rush, just sit. Whatever comes up, and be with your own thoughts and your own emotions.
Okay, so what I want you to do for a second is just imagine. Some of you may have this as a reality. It certainly is the case for Oakton School. This is year 4 for us. But imagine if at the start of every day, every single member of your school community engaged in this. And it doesn't just happen one time at the beginning of the day. It also happens maybe in the middle of the day. So after lunch or recess, or an advisory, or as a part of gym. And again, maybe one more time if you have K-5 schools or middle schools before students are able to go home. Imagine the power that has on resetting and ensuring that people are showing up in a regulated state. That's the intent behind this. This is what I really want to expose us to in this space. I'm not sure how many of us are able to engage in mindfulness or guided meditations or any form of meditation, even yoga, day to day, but it has just fortifying, unique, euphoric approaches or impacts on our body, I should say. So getting near the end of our time before we transition into actual the Q&A portion, but I did want to kind of say, if you didn't hear anything else I said, and you're starting to think about school planning, be it at your classroom level, at the school level or district, what I would say we need to spend a good chunk of our time to really make sure that education checks back into and prioritizes humanity in 3 particular areas. So I call them the big 3 for humanity. Number 1, we need to reprioritize foundational pieces of learning for students. If we noticed in higher ed about 3 years ago, we saw schools like Harvard, University of Chicago, and many others, most schools today have followed suit in that they're not mandating the kids turn in SAT and ACT scores. They sort of shifted so that their grades matter for sure, and other components of educational journeys are considered. I think that has some implications on how we in the K-12 setting should look at education as well. I think that this test scores are one way to measure where kids are going and what they're learning, but I think that we may need to shift pretty radically how much emphasis we put on that as a metric for learning, recognizing that kids are in many states, particularly right now, in flat outright crisis, and we're trying to use data points to measure where they're going. I'm not so sure they're even available enough to where we can even measure it in a real way. Again, I think we need to be a bit more strategic with the foundational pieces of what learning looks like and start to streamline foundational learning. And I think that'll help ease the load that teachers are feeling, so we can have permission to be able to engage in the types of practices that I'm outlining here today. The second piece would be invest in implementing comprehensive mindfulness now. So there are many different strategies and approaches and systems that schools and districts can implement in order to make sure mindfulness is a priority, anywhere from step 1 to 3. If you're already implementing comprehensive mindfulness, I would advocate for you to expand. So to go to the next level, to ensure that if you have it in your school, I would push you to think about what it looks like to ensure that ELL students are being considered, students who have special needs are being considered, and different elements of that. If you're extending to parents in the community and different opportunities like that, if it's going on in staff meetings with other people, how frequent. So if you have it, I would advocate for expanding. If you don't have it, you need to get started. The final piece would be to expand access to mental health services to all stakeholders in the school. Let me be clear here. When I speak about mental health, I'm not speaking about it from the perspective of a sensationalized approach. I'm not talking about the kid who's in crisis who has extreme trauma. I'm talking about everyone. Everybody needs to reconsider how we look at mental health services. I believe that it's a proactive approach to ensuring that we show up each day as our best self. Everyone needs it. Everyone needs some form of mental health services. And by that, I mean therapy. It doesn't necessarily have to occur in school for adults, but I do think we need to reconceptualize how we're looking at mental health services and providing that in the school context. So for folks who are interested in upcoming workshops that sort of take some of the stuff that we were just kind of looking at the high level and put it into practice that can apply to either the school level for school leaders or actually for teachers in the classroom. 2 different workshops I know that I have coming up is Culturally Responsive Leadership, Moving from Theory to Practice. That's January 2020. And then Mindfulness Practices, Strengthening Student-Centered Learning Environments. That's near the end of the school year in May. So I would like to thank you all for your time. For folks who are looking to try to get in contact with me for follow-up questions or resources, my email is brotherlylovebook@gmail.com. For anyone that's interested in purchasing a co-authored book that my brother and I wrote, Brotherly Love, targeting middle graders, 4th through 8th graders, and sort of breaking down many different components of equity and action. You can either order directly from brotherlylovebook.com or shoot me an email, and I can assist you. Tim, how are we doing on time?
You're doing amazing. You're right on time, which is so great. And I'm going to ask everyone, you've got 2 ways you could submit questions to ask Dr. Allen or raise an issue. You could do that in the Q&A, or you could do it right into the chat, which I know a few people have been in the chat already. So whichever is easiest for you. If I could ask a question that wow, just wow. Thank you so much. What an incredible walk through what I am. And you and I are in such agreement on so many of these things. We should talk more, certainly, because I think we're both feeling the same way about how the things we need to do in our schools and our lives. You know, I was thinking about this idea of humanity, though, the way you framed this in terms of humanity. And I was thinking, you know, authenticity, vulnerability, and use the word humane. I was thinking another way to maybe have us identify the places that we need to focus on would be, where are the places in our schools where we're sort of doing the opposite of humanity? You know, so what are those things that we would want to identify or think about that, you know, we would want to really focus our attention on? Because, hey, I'm a principal, I'm a teacher, I don't have much time. You know, I see some aspirational things I should do, but I also wonder, you know, are there some things I need to change in my life? Is there something I need to change in my school? And would it be helpful to think about those things that are really working against the concept of humanity? I don't normally take a negative spin on things. I'm usually a pretty positive guy, but I think this is such a great concept, and I'm still getting my head wrapped around it.
Yeah, so I guess I'll take a stab at this, more of a statement, but I'll respond to it. So I would identify 3 different areas that I think I'm going to probably put a little bit more pressure on school leaders than I will on educators. But I'll say this, there are 3 areas that I think are working against humanity, and it's inherent. Like, so it's not on purpose. It's not a leader or a school leader or a district leader that's planning for this. I just think the system has sort of fallen into this pattern right now. So I would say, number 1, we don't necessarily value teachers' input to the degree to which we should. And if you outside of parents, teachers are the real experts for the learners that are inside their classrooms. I think the current system, particularly the pressure that we're feeling as educational administrators, pushes us to get results, which makes sense. But at the same time, we don't necessarily start, check in, and continually authentically engage the voice of teachers in that process to the degree to which I think is going to be necessary to make humanity real. I think it's operationalized in most leaders' mind, but not necessarily in a tangible, practical sense that makes teachers feel valued. So teacher input is a problem right now. I would say, second, restorative practices. So either schools are, you know, a kid can make a decision that's poor and get into some type of struggle, come to the principal's office or assistant principal's office, and typically there's a lot of one-way forced discussion around how to develop the response that kids need, as opposed to exploratory inquiry-based approach that allows kids to arrive at where the errors in their judgment went and give them the onus and responsibility to develop. Restorative practices are either still punitive or too far left to where teachers are feeling like kids it's a free-for-all and there's not any necessary accountability to that. So I think leaders are still struggling with figuring out how to make humanity real in a way that meets the kids' needs, but also can activate a bridge for teachers. And the final piece is, I just think we need to do a better job of trying to do something day in and day out, even if it's not school-wide, to regulate ourselves. So it could be downloading Liberate or Insight Timer or Headspace, or, you know, something that they maybe only takes 2 to 3 minutes per day and we have time for it, but that'll help us too. And I think right now, because we're not doing it, it's working against humanity being prioritized in schools.
Yeah. I mean, I think the message for me is a lot about what I need to do here with myself, what I can do with the things I can control in the world around me, things like my classroom. These are things, right, that teachers can engage in despite the outside world. I mean, this is one of those places where the good thing about our classrooms kind of being those places where we can create an environment and a climate, teachers can enact this no matter what's happening in the outside of their classroom world, we could implement this tomorrow. There's nothing stopping teachers from doing that.
Absolutely.
So powerful, so powerful. Any questions from the folks in our audience before we are getting close to wrap up time, and I want to leave a little space for that. And I'm just going to ask for any other questions. We'll practice wait time here.
Exactly. You got to model it for sure.
You know, I really appreciate you also putting this in the space of schools, but it's also it's all of our institutions, right? And we think about business, we think about our work environments, we think about our churches and synagogues and places of worship and our public spaces, our public works. One of the things that I do a lot of work on is social emotional learning, and SEL is not just something that we need to think about in our schools, but it really is in our adult, anywhere where we have people coming together, is how are we thinking about myself, my relationship to others, and what you're placing here is just this notion of how I center myself in the moment and start with making sure that I'm a solid foundation before I start, interacting with others or going, teaching lessons or whatever it might be. But I just love that you make this a universal thing that goes even beyond schools.
Yeah, I agree. And to me, it's you sort of stumble into some of these things in life, right? Of course, I studied emotional intelligence for my doctorate in generations, and then somehow it's sort of come full circle now with where my work has been in my career. But I agree with you 100%. Yeah. I think what I'm most fascinated about what's going on in the current landscape is the Harvard study, though.
Yeah,
so Harvard's talking about not just in education, but also in all of the different sectors. If we don't prioritize wisdom and compassion, then we're probably misguided at best on whatever our skills are as leaders. So to me, that was a very telling thing. Of course, when you think about EQ and you think about social emotional learning, which really is undergirding the foundations of emotional intelligence, honestly. But that made sense to me when I thought from the perspective of what are the implications for new leaders, regardless of age, coming into the field, if it's a new field or a field that they've been in. How can you understand that compassion is your bridge while you're building the wisdom? Because it takes experience to have wisdom. And the best leaders, though, have to have them both blended together. So even when I have to come in and make a radical decision that could impact your work status, I still have to be humane with you. I have to understand that you have a family at home. And oftentimes prior to now, it's either you're with us or against us. And usually when we have to sever ties with folks for whatever reason, even if it's valid, there's an inhumane treatment that comes with that to distance oneself from the emotional response to what's going on. And I think that I was proud and happy and pleased to see that there's a lot of data and a lot of research out here to inform us as leaders with doing better and being able to really, truly captivate and activate the power of humanity in everything that we do in schools. So.
Yeah, I agree. So good. So good. This is, if you're not familiar, this is a great book and it does one thing, but I'm now looking forward to the next book by Dr. Allen, because what you've got here, I think, is so powerful, and I can't wait to see it spread. And I'm glad that we're able to spend a little time with you tonight so that we can begin to spread it a little bit ourselves. But you got some sharing to do beyond us, and I really encourage you, because this is just powerful stuff, and I think important to where we want to go. And because this is a great opportunity, right? I mean, as much as we've been in crisis mode for the last 2 years and on all kinds of fronts, if we go on living like we did 3, 4, 5 years ago, we've got to use now to make change. And I think what you are saying should be at the core of that work, right? Of leading us.
I agree. Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it, Tim. I really just want to take some time to thank everybody who tuned in. I know that you all have families and other things that are going on in your lives. It's a tremendous honor and pleasure and privilege to be in this space with each of you. I really appreciate your support, and hopefully this was of value to you, and we'll be able to continue to support and partner as we move forward, Tim.
Sounds great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Allen, and we'll see you around. Thanks.